if I have a codec installed at my site, how once the cabling is done, we plug the Ethernet cable from the touch panel. I will go ahead and put in the IP address of the unit. So I can either put in the IP address manually, or if your switch port has DHCP enabled, your codec will pick up an IP address from the device itself. So there is no default IP address on our codecs. We do not have any APIPA or any other IP address to access our device. The only way is you first configure the IP address, or unit will get the IP address from DHCP, and using that IP address we will be able to access it. Now, how we will see if the device has picked up the IP address is on the monitor screen. When you look on the right hand top corner, it should show you the IP address. Or on the menu, if you go to on the touch panel, if you go to system information screen, similar to the one that you can see on your screen, you will find the IP address on the web as well. Okay. Now, using this IP address, I can simply put that IP address in a browser. You can use HTTPS, HTTP. I can even try to SSH to this device, and I can SSH in. Further, I can see if telnet is turned on, which is off right now. I can enable telnet also. So telnet, SSH, HTTP, HTTPS. These are the available options that we have on this unit to access. One last thing we can do is, one more option we have is using a serial cable, which we already discussed. So based on different models, there are different serial ports available. We can go ahead and use one of those ports to access the device. Okay, so now you got the IP address, you go ahead and access it using the IP address. This is what you will see. By default, username is admin, password is blank, and you will get to this screen. Okay, and from this screen, you can manage your entire endpoint. Be it your registrations to CUCM, Call Manager, or VCS. If you want to make any video changes, if you want to perform upgrades, if you need to see if there are any faults with the system, there's a diagnostic option. The codec screen. These are the things you will see on the main screen, and from this point on, you will be able to perform all the functions which are there on the left side. This is one of the available latest software here. Okay. Now, let's go back and discuss more about the software first before we check all the settings and proceed with the upgrade. I'm sure you all have your laptops with you. So if you're using a laptop, it's nothing but a hardware which has a small chip mounted on it, which we call as CMOS. So there's a CMOS chip which is on the motherboard. Some CMOS chips are called Phoenix. So they basically have an OS loaded on this chip. We call it BIOS. So we do basic input-output check. As soon as your laptop is turned on, it brings up that Phoenix screen or any of the vendor screen, wherein this BIOS ensures that the processors, the RAM, the flash memory, all of that is intact, and codec is or the laptop is working well. So the hardware functionality is validated with the help of this BIOS screen. It just validates if all the hardware is intact, and it can go ahead and proceed with the next function. The function would be it sends an API to bring up the bootloader. So you basically get the bootloader screen here, wherein you see different OS options. Yeah, here you will see one OS or maybe two OS based on how many OS you have in there. Next is selecting one of the OS. So you have Windows or you have uh, or maybe any other OS, Linux, anything you have installed. That OS will be loaded up. So you'll have an OS load screen. Yeah, and then your Windows will start and you'll see the start option. And consider if you got your Windows up and ready, and on your Windows, uh, you enable an auto start of any application. If you enable maybe or you have must seen whenever you start your Windows, McAfee, Norton, or any of the antivirus, they just pop up on its own. So in the OS, we have some auto load OS applications. There are some applications that auto loads as soon as you turn your device on. Yeah. So the reason why I'm telling you this is I'm going to relate or I'm going to tell you the behavior of our codecs comparing to a laptop. How it's pretty similar to this. So you got a CMOS chip. It has a BIOS function which validates the hardware of your codec, and it ensures that the hardware is intact so that it can start the boot load. And at the boot load, it looks for the available list of OS, and from the available list of OS, which one is selected, it will just boot up that OS. And then once the Windows or the OS is loaded completely, OS has some config which can auto load some of the application on its own as soon as you boot up the OS. Now, what is the use of it? It will help to auto populate the application on the screen. So user need not to go in start, look for that application and click next. Another example is if you go to any ATM machine from where you get the money out, those uh, those machines have a Windows installed at the back end. When the Windows is loaded up, they have their application which just loads up on top of the Windows. Now, comparing this to our Cisco platform, this is a hardware. This is our Tandberg or Cisco Codec. It has a small chip in here similar to CMOS, and we call it U-boot. So U-boot is a chip. It's name of the software as well. So there's a chip where we have a small OS loaded up, and that OS is responsible to do a basic check of all the hardware functions. It ensures that all the hardware, all the components, including RAM, processors, everything is in place. And once that check is done, uh, this U-boot sends an API to arrange a list of OS to load from. And from the list of OS, whichever OS is available and is active, so your active OS will get loaded. Here our OS is Linux. So we got Linux installed on top of our Cisco or Tandberg hardware. It's nothing but a machine that has a set of DSPs. It has a set of processors, RAM. It has a flash drive where our config and our OS is loaded. So we got our unit loaded with a small chip called U-boot, which does a basic check of all the hardware components. It ensures that processor, everything is in place. Then it checks what all OS do we have in the flash memory. It will look for all the Linux OS. Once the it finds the active load, it sends an API to start the OS, which one is set active in the config. So we'll get our Linux OS loaded up completely. Once Linux is fully loaded, this U-boot will auto load. The way we auto load any application on top of Windows, we auto load a TC software on top of the Linux OS. So that's the backend function that happens when you turn any device on. So you turn your device on. Let me just repeat everything one more time. You have a small chip on the hardware of our Cisco Codec, which we call as U-boot. The software is also known as U-boot. The function is it does a basic check to all the components to make sure these components are functional, and then it sends an API to load up the active OS, a Linux OS. Once Linux is loaded, you get the TC software auto load on top of the Linux OS. Now to explain this in technical terms, let me just find out an output of our serial console. So I used to get some output from our units. You will see this text. So this function is called U-boot. Basically, it's a software which loads up as soon as you turn your system on. It check what CPU we have, what RAM do we have, and what flash drive we have. It will check all of that. It also fetches the board detail. So this is serial number of our unit. It checks all of that component. It verifies the audio and video boards we have, so the video DSPs and etc. etc. Then it starts loading up the Linux from here. So it looks for the booting image. So this is image 1, and we should have another image also. And after the loading starts, we go down, and this is a point. This is the last section that you would see when you first load up your unit. The moment you load up your screen, it will start showing Cisco logo, and from that point on till this point, it will show you Cisco logo. Console enabled, boot console disabled. So this is a time when it enables all the HTTP, HTTPS, SSH, all of that features. Basically, the services are enabled at this point. And after this, you will see the login prompt. And this is when you will start seeing the TC loading up on your codec. When I say TC, it means Tandberg Codec. It's the name of our software, which was there from day one since Tandberg launched. But now it has been renamed to CE. So the latest software would be CE, but TC was always there from day one for all the old generations. But you need to know TC because SX20, if you will be working on those products, TC would still be there. There will be some customers using TC. So you would need to have a little bit of background of that product as well. Okay. So once you log in with the credentials, you will get into the console of it. It's similar to the console we have for our VMs when you log in from UCS. So whatever you can do from SSH, you can do it from serial as well once you log in here. So yeah, that's the background of our codecs, of the hardware, how it gets loaded on the screen. Now the next thing I have in mind is to give you a little bit of background of our TC software, how TC was introduced, what all images, what all versions have been there, and what changes have been made.